Hey, what's up guys? It's Kyle here from RR Buildings, and I'm going to take you through the step-by-step how to trim out a window on a post frame, especially when you are doing a metal siding. A lot of questions how that works and how it's flashed properly so that you don't get water getting in behind your window. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a measurement of my window. So I am 47 and an eighth, or sorry, 47 and a half by 35 and a half. Now I already know that because I've done these windows a couple times now, but now that I have those dimensions, I can go and make up my trims for the perimeter of the window. So what we are going to do is use a piece of J channel, and this can be found from probably any metal supplier. It's just a simple, I mean, if you look at it from the end, it looks like the letter J. So it's got a longer back leg, that way you can nail it to your wall, and then it's got a J that wraps around so that your steel can go in here and look nice and finished. So what I'm going to do is I always like to have, and you will see this later, I always like to use my factory ends for my side pieces, and that is because the top of them is going to be finished, and you will see it. So I like to make sure that that factory top, and this is what I'm talking about, this is a factory, it's not been cut, not by any, you know, snips or anything on the site. So this was done in the factory, which means it's nice and clean. So this will be visible. Do people not know I'm doing YouTube? Hey, sweetie. Oh, it's going great. How are you doing? I'll ask them. Thanks, I love you. Have a great day, bye. Okay, we're back. So, as I was saying before, my lovely wife called me to let me know about her day and how it was going, which is going okay in case you guys were curious. So now that I know my dimensions over there on the window, I'm going to make my sides first, and I'm going to measure off of the factory cut edge. Now over there I said the dimension was 35 and a half. What I also need to do is I need to mark 35 and a half, but then I need to add 1 inch for the bottom trim, because it's going to need to go 1 inch further than the window so that it can match up with my bottom trim dimension. So what I do is I mark 35 and a half, and then I'm going to add 1 inch. But I'm going to show you a little trick. The dimension of this steel is 1 inch, but I always go 1/8 inch bigger, and when I get to the installation part of the video, you will see why I'm doing that. So make a mental note that it's okay if you go a little bit bigger on this dimension. I'm gonna do that from both ends. That way I get both sides of my trim. Now it's hard to see on the dark trim, I understand that. I'm gonna pull out my Martinez square, which is a prototype, awesome square by my buddy Mark. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna square around that 36 and 5/8 measurement. And then on my 35 and a half inch measurement, I'm just gonna square the back side. So I've got the 35 and a half measurement, I got the 36 and 5/8 measurement that is squared around. Now when I'm coming from this side, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna use my reds. Reason is, it does a better finish when going through the hem. You can kind of see this side is a little bit cleaner. Right when you pop through the hem right here, not sure if you can see it, you get a little bit of a dimple, but if you use the right snip, you'll avoid that on the finished side of your piece of trim. I always make 2 cuts, and that is so I can take this little piece here and bend it up. That'll allow me to come in and make another nice and clean cut. And then this measurement does not, or this cut does not need to be perfect. If you feel more comfortable making a square line, you can do that, but for the purposes of what this trim is, this is not as important. I've got the 35 and a half inch mark here, just on this back face, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my reds, because it's just easier for me, and I'm gonna cut right along the edge. And I'm gonna do that on both sides, just cutting up to that line. Then I'm gonna take just about 1/8 inch to almost nothing out. Take this little flap that you just made, and you're gonna bend it to about 90 degrees. So you see what we've done there. Okay, now the last thing you're gonna do is I'm gonna be cutting a miter on this piece of trim, but I never go exactly to the point. I'm gonna come in just about 1/8 or so, and I'm just gonna connect that dot, leaving this a little bit square, not a straight point, and you'll see why later. Now over on this side, I'm gonna use my greens. Same reason as the other side, so that I get a nice clean cut on the side that I'm gonna be using. So those are going to be my sides. This little tail here is going to tuck into my bottom trim, and this miter is going to go over top of it. So now to make my bottom trim, first thing I got to do is clean off this end. So I'm going to kind of square this around, and you'll see why, but this doesn't matter as much for being a perfect cut with a square. It's actually going to get buried in my side trims. So I'm 47.5 wide, which means I need to add 2 inches, one for both sides. So I'm actually gonna mark this at 49.5 and 48.5. That'll give me 1 inch past this side. And then on this side, I'm gonna mark 1 inch. And all I need to do is square just the top side of this trim. Get a nice line there. On this side, I need to square both these on the top side and square the outside dimension around so I can get a nice cut. Okay, so now that I've got the bottom trim, this is my bottom window J. I've got that line that I made. I'm gonna do kind of the same thing that I did on my sides. Only this time we're gonna do a little trick with metal, and that is bend it about 10 times or so, and it will snap clean off. Give you a nice clean cut without having to make some weird snip cut to get in there, which is really hard to do. So I'll show you that again. I cut right out to my line that I've got on the trim, and I'm just gonna really tightly grab it underneath and give it a nice tight bend. So getting that to break right on that line, give it a couple back and forth, and you can see that does a really nice job actually of getting a nice clean bend. So now I've got my 3 pieces of trim. Let's go over to the window and let's show you how I install them. So the first thing we like to do is throw some silicone around the perimeter of the window. That way, if I am not a fan of caulking windows visually, so that I don't want anybody to see the caulk. Reason being is it always seems like caulk gets dirty. It looks like garbage after any sort of time. So I'm trying to always hide my sealant so that you don't see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a nice bead of caulk up here, and I run it a little bit long, and that is where I'm going to be putting my bottom trim, and this is going to get pushed into that bead of caulk so that any water that comes around, it might sit right here, but it's not going to last for long, nor is it going to be really detrimental because it's not going to be able to make its way back into the building. Now what I'm going to do is I've got these notches. I just kind of put my finger here in the notch, and I feel right where the window goes to the edge of that notch. And I just push up nice and tight. That's also creating a little bit of a slope on this piece of trim. There's just a slight slope, and I'll just use my pass load stapler. It does a really nice job. And I'll get that fastened, and then I'll come here to the side, I'll do the same sort of thing. Now here what I like to do is I like to just run a bead this way, and I like to run a bead out this way. So water has to make its way out over top, not working its way behind. Now with the side trim, this is kind of important. You'll notice right here, I don't know if you can see that, there's a hem and it's slightly open, okay? That is an important detail. When we go ahead and tuck this in here, we're gonna make sure that this guy tucks into that J channel, and we're gonna make sure that this is tucked over top of that. So what I like to do is I like to fish this in, and then as I bring it in, making sure this is overlapping this, and then this is where the important part comes, Greg, making sure that this hem is opened enough to grab this piece of trim, and it slides right in. Make sure you like where it's at. Obviously you can always use nails or screws if you want to use like a nice little flat-headed screw, but you'll see here, we're gonna wait for that train to go by. So remember I told you to run this dimension an 1/8 inch longer. Now you can kind of see why this little bit of a tip is just running past. Now what I like to do is I like to grab, I'm actually gonna use greens coming this way, and I like to take it and just barely, I'm just gonna keep it there, cut that off. Now what that did was, first off, I made a nice clean cut exactly where it's supposed to be versus measuring it out and hoping that it lines up perfectly, but also it cinched it tight. By cutting it, it squeezed the metal together, and it's gonna keep this nice and clean. Now the other thing is, the reason I don't run this miter exactly to the point, because it just doesn't give it as good of a finish. So hopefully that little tip might help you guys, but I know the biggest thing, the biggest question is what we do with the top trim, and do we install it before our steel or after our steel? So let's talk about that detail. Now that we've got the steel up to the window, it's time to put the steel around the window. So our first piece, we're gonna measure it, and we're gonna measure it into the J channel, from the sides, the bottom, and then we'll also measure to the top of that J channel, which I've got all my measurements wrote down. So now we'll go over to the piece of steel. So what we've done is we've marked out the sheet with the measurements. We've put some lines on it. And the thing to note is that to be tight to the top of my window here, it was 43 3/4. But I went just a little bit higher, and you'll see why when I get this all cut out. Now if you guys watch the Tools Day video on how to cut metal, I'll go ahead and I'll tag it right up here. You would know that we use the nibblers to go over the ribs, but when it's time to cut the flats out, our go-to is usually the double cut shear. We're gonna add another layer of protection here. We'll throw another nice bead of silicone in here. We'll wrap that around. Okay, now the important part here is getting it in your J. This side is actually a little bit high, so I got my ladder here. We're not fans of ladders here at our buildings, but sometimes. kind of a mixture of trying to get it in the top while simultaneously getting it in the bottom. Okay, so that's one side. I will do the exact same thing to the other side, and then I will show you how to put that top J channel in. For us, it's important to run the steel first, J channel it later. Okay, so once you've got the steel up over the window, you're gonna leave everything up top fairly loose, and I've got a piece of J trim cut from that edge of the cutout to that edge of the cutout, and all I did was I just stuck my piece of J channel up here, went from this side, marked this side, and cut it. Now what you'll notice is I've got this cut off here, so it's not straight all the way to the point. And that is so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out, always being very careful, and you're going to slide it all the way over till it's tight on the one side, and then you're just going to kind of, well, it's nice when you got a punch, might not need it, might not need it. You're just going to put your hand up in here. Oh, hey, thanks, Greg. Hey, where'd you come from? And you're just gonna pull that out a little bit, work it, and that'll go in there. Now, the important thing is to notice this right here. So if I pull this trim out, so there you go. Hopefully you can see that now. Remember I told you to cut that just a little bit higher at the top of the window? That is so this J channel is tucked up in there, so any water that comes down is going to go into the J channel, and then it's going to go out, and it's going to come down here. Now the next thing you can do is you can put just a slight little bead of caulk right in here, stopping any of this water from wrapping around. But remember, we've also got this caulk back here, both underneath the trim and over top of the trim underneath the steel. And all that water is going to go down, and it's going to go up over your base trim. So the last thing I will do is I will go ahead and I'll screw all this off. I'll get it all nice and tight. The other thing is that you want to make sure that you do this in a timely fashion, because you just put a bunch of silicone underneath all these trims and steel, and you want to get it all done and fastened before that has a time to harden or cure. So as you go, put that top trim in to make sure it's all good. Once I get that trim in there, you can see those screws right across the top. I just do it on the corresponding side of the rib where the rest of my punch holes are, so it looks all nice. So there you go. Now you have a nice J channel trimmed window, and should be nice and watertight. I'm sure there are many more ways to do it, and that's the beauty. If you're not learning, you're dying. So if you guys have a great way to flash out a window, you know, let me know. Link a video if there's a better video somewhere. I'd love to learn myself. This is how we have done it for the last 5 or 6 years, and always trying to think of a newer, better way to do it. So I appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe for more tips and tricks in the future. And if you haven't already, go check out either my Tools Day video or go check out the latest Build Series video. So thanks a lot, guys, and have a great day. And always, guys, if you know somebody that could use these tips or tricks, make sure you're sharing this channel. I greatly appreciate the support. That's basically the reason this is all being done, is to hopefully elevate the standards, maybe educate some people on post frame and how it is done across the world, more in particularly the Midwest and Northern Illinois. This is how we do it. So I love hearing from all you guys down in the comments, and definitely hit that thumbs up if you're liking the content. Thanks, guys.